Welcome to the Appalachian Heritage Woodshop, woodworking with an Appalachian flair.
This is Jerill with the Appalachian Heritage Woodshop. Today I want to talk to you about cabinet doors. A good friend of mine, Chad Stanton Fine Furniture up in northern Ohio, talked to me one time about repairing cabinet doors. He says, as a businessman, it's a lucrative part of your business and you should consider it. I'd been turning away repair work and I heeded his advice and decided to start repairing cabinet doors as people brought them to me. And I've done that very successfully. So I recommend that you go to Chad Stanton Fine Furniture, check out his YouTube on repairing cabinet doors, and you will see that you can make some money on repairing cabinet doors. Now, I've never advertised that. I just, as people would bring them to me, I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I started doing that. So I want to talk to you about a client that brought me a couple cabinet doors and wanted me to repair them. And I said, no, I'm not going to repair those. I will build you 2 new cabinet doors identical to those. The individual hired a woodworker in Charleston, West Virginia to build a sink cabinet base, and the cabinet base had 2 doors on it. He installed it in a rental unit, leased a unit out. 1 year later, the tenants left. He went in to do a cleanup, and the doors were warped. So he took them off, and he heeded some not good advice, and he straightened them and mounted them back on. Rented the unit out for another year. That tenant left a year later, went in to do a cleanup, and the doors had warped even more. So he took the doors off and went back to the place where he purchased them, where he had them custom made, and the business was closed. Imagine that. So I would guess that it was probably what I call a weekend warrior. Not condemning weekend woodworkers, but a professional, someone that does it full time, has a lot of knowledge and a lot of skill. So I want to go over the 6 mistakes that were made on these cabinet doors. 5 of these mistakes were knowledge-based, 1 was skill-based. So let's start with the obvious first. Now, most of you can see the split right down the middle of the panel, and you can see the split over here. And when you look very closely at this, where the panel goes into the recess in the stiles and rails, you'll notice some glue squeeze out. It's probably hard to see on the camera, but there's some right here. There's some here in the corner. Down here's a couple drops. So these panels were glued in place and clamped so they could not float. So that was a knowledge-based mistake. Every woodworker that is any good knows that wood is hygroscopic. It is continually taking on moisture or giving off moisture based on the environment. The only time it is not doing that is when it is at a condition known as equilibrium moisture content, where the wood has stabilized equal to the environment around it. So these panels were glued in place. They could not expand and contract. So that was a knowledge-based mistake. That was the first one. Now, while we're talking about the panels, we're going to talk about mistake number 2. And again, this is knowledge-based. When it comes to panels for doors, there's 2 types of panels. You can have a glued-up panel, or you can have a single panel. So let's look at these panels. These panels are glued up. And by that, I mean there are more than 2 boards glued together. 3 or more boards glued together is a glued up panel. When you have a glued up panel, you need to take the time and make sure the grain on all the boards match. If I turn this over, it's a little bit more obvious. Here, this is poplar. Here you can see the different tone of the wood. Also noticed the grain here and the grain here does not match. When I turn this one over, you notice right here you can see. So when you glue up panels, you need to make sure that they are balanced. If it's a cathedral grain, which is very common, you need to make sure the cathedral grain on all of the boards, in all of the panels, in all of the doors are going the same direction. If you have one going the opposite direction, it's offensive to the eye. It's out of place. You notice it. So even within the species, you need to have the density to be similar, you need to have the collar to be similar, and you need to have the boards cut in the same way. In other words, you don't put a rift sawn with a plain sawn. The grain is too obvious and they don't match, and the glue line will stand out. They will absorb a finish at a different rate, and if the finish has a collar in it, then it's going to stand out even more. So you need to take the time to make sure, if you have a glued up panel, that your boards match. Now let's look at what's called a single panel. Now a single panel does not always mean one board. It can mean two boards glued together. Now here's an example. This is a cabinet door I made several years ago, and it's actually a mistake. As you can see, it has an arch top. And this is a left side door, and for this particular piece I made two left side doors instead of a left and a right, so this was a mistake. I've set it aside, and you can see it's got some finish and stain and stuff splattered around it where I had it in my finishing area. But what I want you to pay attention to, this is actually two boards. This is curly cherry that is about 3/16 of an inch thick. I made my own veneer and then mounted that onto hard maple and made the raised panel door. These two boards are book matched. So although it's two boards glued together, it's considered a single panel. This is very pleasing to the eye. You can have a single panel, which is not good. This is a sample I made, and I keep by my shaper so that I can show potential clients the different type of doors. This was made out of a piece of scrap wood, and if you notice, it's one board, but poplar, which is common to have different collar streaks through it, has got a streak in it right here, and of course that is off balanced. So I would not put this in a cabinet and sell it. I use this just as a sample. But this is an example of a single panel that's not balanced. Now the doors that I made are a single panel, and if you notice, it has the same amount of sapwood on both sides. This panel, which was one board, was much, much wider, and I took the time to balance it so that you have a center point visually. If I had ripped all of the excess off of one side, this would have shifted over and it would look out of balance. So you can have a single panel door that is out of balance. So if it's single panel, you need to make sure it's symmetrical, make sure it's balanced, make sure it is not offensive to the eye. Again, that was mistake number 2, and that is the panel was not pleasing to the eye. So mistake number 3, and this is probably one that all of you have noticed and have been waiting for me to point out, and that is that the wood that the individual used was too wet. Now you can see the significant split down through here. Again, this is from Charleston, West Virginia. According to the U.S. Forestry Service Kiln Operator's Manual, If you air dry wood in Charleston, West Virginia, it will not go below 12%. That's not an opinion, that's a scientific fact. Now, before a lot of you jump up and start screaming, let me explain. That is at ambient temperature. There are things you can do to accelerate or elevate the air drying process. A lot of people will take wood and put it in the attic of a garage. They'll put it in a loft of a barn. They'll put it somewhere in the shop and put a fan on it and a heat lamp on it. That is not ambient conditions. You're changing the ambient environment. So doing that, you can dry slightly less than 12%. You can probably get down to about 9-10%. According to the U.S. Forestry Service, any wood that is used inside a conditioned residential home needs to be between 6% and 8%. That's not an opinion, it's a scientific fact. Based on the climate in Charleston, West Virginia, the interior moisture and temperature is going to result in any wood that is inside a residential home that is conditioned, it's going to always be between 6% and 8%. So if you use wood that's air dried at 12%, even if you accelerate that and get it down to 10%, and you build something with it and take it inside a conditioned residential home in Charleston, West Virginia, it's going to go down to 6% and then 8%, back down to 6%, back up to 8%, back down to 6%. It's going to eventually get to where it's stable and it's going to fluctuate based on the season between 6% and 8%. Okay, so that was mistake number 3. Now before I go into mistake number 4, let me divert some of you. You may be saying, the wood has too much tension and that's why it warped. Well, let me talk about that for a minute. As a craftsman, if you're getting rough wood and you're dimensioning it in your shop, as you dimension it, you can tell whether it's too much tension in that wood. As you joint it, as you plane it, as you rip it, as you resaw it, as you do these stages to get a properly dimensioned board, you will see that it contains stress. If it contains too much stress and it is not firmly attached, such as a cabinet door, you shouldn't be using it. But I don't believe this is from stress. But those of you that said this is from stress, you need to know you should have the knowledge to be able to identify wood that's stressed, and you should have the knowledge to know when it is okay to use that wood and when it's not. And for a door, stiles, and rails, you don't want wood that has stress in it. So I don't believe this is from stress, but for those of you that say it is, even if it is from stress, it still falls on the craftsman because he did not identify it and he used it when he shouldn't have. So, tension in the wood. Wood movement. That's number 3, and that's all knowledge-based. Now let's go to mistake number 4. Mistake number 4 is there is no finish on these cabinet doors. When I was talking to the client on the phone, when he told me he wanted these doors repaired, I asked him a few questions. He told me they came from a sink base cabinet and they were warped, and he told me how much they were warped. And I said, what kind of finish is on it? And he said, there is no finish. I said, has there been a leak under the sink? He says, not to his knowledge. We talked a little bit more, and I said, I will not repair them. I will make you 2 new doors. I know there was no finish applied on this, not just because of what the client said, but I can visually see there's not only no finish, but the individual that made these doors did not prep the wood for a finish. In other words, you can still see the mill marks, and there's no excuse for that. That is both knowledge-based and skill-based. You need to prep the wood, sand it, or hand plane it, whatever, cabinet, card, scraper. You need to prep the wood by removing all of the mill marks, and that was not done. And again, that may have been an agreement between the client and the individual that made these. I don't know. I do know the client, when I told him I would make him 2 doors, when I was talking to him, he said he would apply the finish. And I stressed to him that it needs to be done. And we discussed what type of finish, and he assured me that he will be applying a finish. So on the doors that I made, I went ahead and prepped it, properly sanded, so these doors are ready for a finish, and the client will apply the finish. So mistake number 4 on these doors, no finish. Okay, mistake number 5. And again, this is knowledge-based, not skill-based. If you look real close, the stiles and the rails are not sized correctly. These doors were made and glued together and then sold to the client. The proper way to make a door is to make the stiles and rails slightly oversized and then trim it to the size you need. If you look real close at the end grain here where the stiles and rails come together, they don't line up. So that tells me these were not trimmed off after they were made. The client requested I make the doors the exact same size he wants these to put back in. So if you look closely, you can see this style is not the same width as this style. And that's the way these doors are. So I made it identical so he can put these right in place. The other thing is, based on the hardware that he used, the location, which I drilled a hole so these will go right back in, this hole actually cuts into the panel that is tucked into the groove. So as a craftsperson, that shouldn't be done. Now I did that with the client's approval because he wants them identical with this and he wants them to be able to hang in the same place. So the mistake that was made here was the stiles and rails weren't sized right. The door was not made oversized and then trimmed to the proper size, and the hole was drilled in such a way that it also drills into the panel. So those are all knowledge-based mistakes. It's critical if you have inset doors that they be trimmed to the proper size. These are overlay doors, so it's not that critical, but I made them identical size so they will fit into the same place without any issue. So mistake number 5, knowledge-based, the stiles and rails are not sized properly. Mistake number 6 is a skill-based mistake. Let me get my square. Now, I know these doors are warped very bad, but when I hold that square, it wobbles and it's out at about 3/16 of an inch out of square. And for a door this small to be 3/16 of an inch out of square, there's no excuse. That is 100% skill-based, and the individual that did that should not have done that. And of course, mine are square. Now, I will be the first to say that if you have an inset door, the door has to match the opening, and there are times when you will deliberately make a door out of square to match the opening so you have an equal reveal all the way around. But again, these are not inset doors, these are overlay doors, so there's no excuse for that. So that was mistake number 6. The other thing I wanted to do was give you a little tip. When you do a panel that is floating, you have to be concerned with glue squeeze out from the stile and rail joinery getting onto the panel on the corner and keeping the panel from floating. So I always just barely round over the corner, and then I take a piece of candle wax and put just on the corner, and that is the part that goes into the rabbet, or into the groove, I mean, so it doesn't see that, but that keeps the glue, if there's any squeeze out, from sticking to the panel. So that's a little tip to make sure that the panel does float and doesn't accidentally get glued in place. So that's the 6 mistakes that this individual made building these cabinet doors. So let's go over the 6 mistakes that this craftsperson made building these doors. Mistake number 1, the panel does not float. It is glued in place. Mistake number 2, the panel is not symmetrical. It is not pleasing to the eye. It is offensive to the eye. He should not have used these boards when he glued them up. Mistake number 3, the wood was too wet for the use for an indoor residential climate-controlled house. It was too wet. Mistake number 4, no finish was applied. The wood was not properly prepped to apply finish. Mistake number 5, stiles and rails are the wrong size. Mistake number 6, the door's out of square. Now, a lot of people, some of them that come to me, want me to do something. I quote them a price. They say it's too high. They go somewhere else. They hire somebody else at a lower price. That's great. I've got no problem with that. But you get what you pay for. These doors are not professional quality and should have never been sold. They should have never been done and sold to a client. It is inferior. So I made 2 new doors. The client will come by and pick them up, and he'll hang them in place, put the finish on it, and be done with it. So I hope you've gained something from looking at these 6 mistakes. So if you ever build cabinet doors, you will be aware of some of the issues that as a craftsman you need to know, so you don't run into these problems. This is Jerill Vance with the Appalachian Heritage Woodshop, reminding you, be proud of your Appalachian heritage.